Peter McHugh, Carter Jonas, and I'm the agent on the application.
Good morning, my name is Jim Griffiths and I'm the Managing Director of the applicant company Gibson Developments Limited.
Kevin Blencoe, member of the Planning Committee.
Councillor Martin Smart, member of the Planning Committee. David Duncliffe, member of the Planning Committee.
John Hipkin, member of the Planning.
Valerie Holt, substitute for Lucy Singer on the Planning Committee.
Councillor Edward Hopkins, member councillor of the application.
Councillor Colin McGurty, ward councillor for Queen's.
Councillor Katie Thornburn, member of the Planning Committee.
Wendy Blythe, Chair of the Hills Road Residents Association, and here on behalf of petitioners.
Valérie Duchesne, a local resident, and here on behalf of the petitioners.
James Berry, I live on Hills Road, I'm one of the three petitioners.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say a few words about the forum. The forum is a meeting where petitioners can present their views to councillors, planning officers and the applicant some weeks before a planning application is finally determined. The aim of the forum is to allow early discussion of the planning issues raised by petitioners and to explore the scope for building consensus and for resolving concerns. It is an informal meeting and the forum does not determine the application. A formal committee ultimately determines the application. In this case, it is anticipated that the application will be reported to the planning committee later this month for determination. That's in course the 29th of May. Minutes will be taken and circulated to the main parties. They will also be published on public access web pages. The case officer will take the outcome of the meeting into consideration in any future discussions and negotiations. Minutes of the forum will be attached to the committee report and addressed in the report. During the question and answer session of the forum, it is important that councillors who may ultimately make the decision on the planning application should avoid expressing views that might give any appearance that they are approaching the proposal with a closed mind. The discussion should not be used for negotiations with the developer. These should take place with officers separately after the meeting. Councillors may ask petitioners questions and it would be helpful if they can respond. However, the forum is essentially an opportunity for councillors to seek advice and petitioners should avoid entering into dialogue with the applicants during the forum, please. Ward councillors may make a statement after the petitioner's presentation but cannot ask questions. Members of the public, please, you should refrain from entering into any discussions at the forum. I will assume that everyone has read the agenda for the forum and would ask that the applicants and petitioners keep to time during their presentations if at all possible. I will now ask the applicants to respond to the issues raised by the petitioners and can you please limit your presentation to 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Good morning all. We're going to split things into two parts this morning for our presentation. Jim Griffiths from Gibson Developments to my left is going to speak just for a few minutes and summarise the process to date with the applications from the applicant's perspective. As members will be aware, there has been a lot of interest in the application and there has been a fair bit of negative press reported as well. So Jim's just going to talk for a few minutes and then I will give a short presentation just on the revised scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. Gibson Developments is emphatically not, as some have characterised us or sought to characterise us, as a greedy property developer seeking to make every last penny out of this site. We are a small local business that over the last 12 years has built a number of projects in Cambridge City. We are extremely proud of the quality and sustainability of the homes we have created, some of which can be viewed on our website. Gibson Developments doesn't do leaflet drops. We don't approach householders asking if they're wanting to sell the house. Every development we have done has either been purchased with planning consent in place, or as in this case, where a homeowner approached us. In addition to helping set up Gibson Developments, I was a long-serving director of the Aqua Building Services Group, initially located on Cherrington Road, and later expanding to employ hundreds of local people. I myself am Cambridge born. I grew up in the Romsey Town area and I have a lifelong association with Hills Road. For the past 33 years, I've lived on Hills Road, about 400 metres or so from the application property. I know the site really well and have passed it almost every day, so literally thousands of times. The site is extremely neglected and completely overgrown. Despite passing the property so many times, until last year I had never seen the house because the trees and foliage render the house virtually invisible to the passer-by, other than the barest glimpsed views. The option 1 so-called compromise in the petition include the words, the property would remain as a landmark building. A landmark building that you can't see? For many decades, this house has not been a landmark property. The previous owners of the house had lived there for 21 years, and when he approached me in January 2017, we made it clear to him that we're a new build developer. We don't carry out refurbishment work. That's not what we do. So if you wish to see the house preserved, he should sell on the private market or approach another developer. He had no such misgivings, and indeed he emphasised the shortcomings of the house, having lived there for so long. Now, not least because I am a local resident and this is my own backyard, I made sure from the outset that we and the team scrupulously followed the correct process and rules. Before buying the property, we checked to establish that the building was not protected or considered important. We discovered that it was not listed, it's not on the council's list of buildings of local interest, and in the council's Suburbs and Approaches Hills Road report from 2012, it is not even rated positive, but only neutral. Now, the campaigners have since sought to argue that the 2012 report made a mistake with 291. Well, I don't think it was a mistake, but in any event, surely it was not unreasonable for us to rely on that report. We quickly established that 4 trees on the site were protected, and it was clear that in our best financial interests, we should remove all other unwanted trees rather than risk further protection orders being applied when we engage with the planning process. We decided this would be wrong and provocative, but as we feared, within weeks the tree officer came to site, quickly made 7 other trees subject to preservation orders, and severely limited the scope of what you can do on the site because of the root zones. We've been remarkably patient during this incredibly drawn-out planning process. It is now 18 months since our positive pre-application. We waited almost 9 months between our first full application and the planning meeting that rejected it in the face of I think a fairly strong recommendation. On this current application, which is only a resubmission, addressing the 4 reasons given on our first application, we will again miss the 3-month deadline for determination. I met with a couple of the campaign leaders in October 2017, and they asked for the opportunity of finding interesting parties to buy the house. They claimed that they knew of a number of people that would be interested. I said we were quite willing to consider offers and interest, but in the event, no one has come forward. Since our planning applications were rejected in April, and obviously looking at our options, we decided that we would fully market the house. And that's, for the last 3 months, is what we've been doing. We've had a number of viewings, but no offers were received apart from one by another developer, subject to obtaining planning permission, and a party who clearly could not finance their offer as they needed a 75% £1.5 million mortgage. Now, the campaigners have made much of the fact that the first owner of the house back in 1910 was Sir Fred Hire, a wealthy businessman and landowner. The fact is that preserving the house would require another Fred Hire, somebody with deep pockets, able to not only buy the property, but spend the many hundreds of thousands required to refurbish it. We never remotely saw coming the firestorm that our applications had set off, and I confess I remain bewildered by it. With hindsight, we would certainly not have bought the site. However, I submit that our high-quality scheme of 14 one and two bedroom apartments, most likely to be of interest to workers on the Addenbrooke's campus, with many opting to cycle or walk a short distance, is a much better use of this half-acre site than preserving the house for one wealthy family to live in, or pursuing a totally unviable attempt to turn the house into flats that the building does not remotely lend itself to. And one report that was obtained on behalf of the objectors made the same point from John Harris, that it does not lend itself to subdivision or extension. When you strip back the emotion, nostalgia and politics surrounding our applications, I think it is clear that our scheme is the best future option for this site, the Queen Edith community and the city. Thank you.
Apologies, members. Good morning. Thank you, Jim, for those words.
The microphone's not on.
Is that better?
Yep.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I'd just like to outline the applicant's position on the application. We are reluctant participants this morning. We feel that the DCF request that has been made by the petitioners is not valid. The purpose of the DCFs in sort of our consideration is that they aren't in place to consider in principle outright objections to applications, and that is what we feel is in front of us this morning. We feel that no suggestions for a reasonable compromise solution has been made. We have been through this exercise with the original application on the site, and following that DCF we made some really significant changes to the scheme. We feel actually that the petitioner's position has hardened. On the first application, one of the options was that if demolition was to take place, instead of introducing flats to the site, 2 family homes should be provided. We feel that we've been open and transparent throughout, and we have given the objectors every opportunity for dialogue. The application in front of us today has been submitted in response to application 17-1372-FUL that was refused by the Planning Committee in May 2018. The application was reported to Planning Committee with a recommendation of approval. However, members resolved to overturn that recommendation, citing 4 refusal reasons, which can be summarised as failure to provide affordable housing, inconvenient cycle parking, cramped accommodation, and failure to provide arrangements for visitor car parking. The principle of demolition and the introduction of a flatted development was considered acceptable. The proposals therefore constitute a resubmission of the original application, and it is felt that the application in front of you today has overcome the 4 issues considered to exist at the site by the Planning Committee. I'm going to now just look at those 4 refusal reasons and just summarise how the scheme has responded. The first refusal reason, which was the delivery of affordable housing. The scheme now seeks consent for 14 units and is therefore compliant with the requirements of both policy 5.5 of the adopted Cambridge local plan and paragraph 30 of the affordable housing SPD. That just shows the revised floor plans, the image at the bottom. The second refusal reason referred to the convenience of the cycle parking for residents. So in changing things around, the cycle store is now conveniently located at ground floor. It's easily accessible to all units and both building entrances. This can accommodate 27 cycles, including space for a cargo bike, and this is in excess of what planning policy would require. The minimum in policy terms would be 22 spaces. There's 8 visitor spaces provided to the front of the building as well. The layout of the cycle parking arrangements is also compliant with the cycle guide from 2010. The third refusal reason referred to cramped accommodation. So the scheme, as it said, it now provides 14 units, 8 2-bed units and 6 1-bed units. We consider all of the units are in line with the nationally described space standards, which the committee are attaching weight to. Units 2, 4 and 10 are 2-bed, 3-person units. These extend to 60 square metres gross internal area. However, this does not include the 4 square metre amenity space which the units are provided with. We feel that a high quality residential environment will be provided and that the scheme is fully compliant with policy 3.7 of the Cambridge local plan. The fourth refusal reason referred to the scheme not delivering visitor car parking. So we have revised this situation, and 1 visitor car parking space is now provided at ground floor level. Within the basement there are another visitor space in the basement and then provision for 2 disabled spaces within the basement as well. I'll just go back to the introduction slide, and you can see to the front of the right hand block is where the visitor car parking space is located. Looking at other matters, the application is supported by all statutory consultees, including urban design, landscape, highways, environmental health, drainage, waste, and the disability panel. The highways impact was discussed at length previously at the committee meeting in April, and Ian Dyer was present. Ian has confirmed within his latest consultative response that the proposal should have no significant impact on the public highway should it gain the benefit of planning permission. Again, the trees to be removed from the site, we have been guided and influenced by your tree officer, Joanna Davies, who we met on site last year to discuss matters. In summary, the proposals constitute a resubmission of planning application 17-1372, which was refused planning permission in May of this year. The revised application, we feel, has responded positively to those 4 identified refusal reasons, and we feel that a high quality residential development is proposed and one that will deliver 13 residential units in a highly central and sustainable location. The proposals are considered to be compliant also with all relevant national and local planning policies. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you. Could I now ask the petitioners to give their presentation, please? And again, could you move it to 15 minutes, please? Thank you.
petitioners to talk about this application and to discuss the material planning considerations relevant to our case as shown on the screen.
Sorry, could I just ask you to not to lean too close into the mic because it distorts if you
Okay,
get too
so
close.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about the local context and the setting for this application. The architectural style of this area is one of detached and semi-detached villas and civic buildings, many of them arts and crafts buildings. The buildings are set well back, screened by hedges and tall trees. Many of them date from the late 19th and early 20th century. This is an Edwardian period landscape. It's a landscape of tall trees of stature, leafy hedges, and well set back green frontage that matches the period architecture. As Peter Studdard, former director of Cambridge City Council Planning, wrote, the trees are in scale with the properties and the highway. Major city approach roads should be memorable, and this is best done where trees flank the highway. A few buildings, as students pointed out, are listed in the Hills Road area. None of these buildings in Hamilton College are listed, just like Raylands. Nearly every building on Hills Road could be demolished. This would cause a national outcry. The City Council's guidance notes establish material planning considerations for a neighbourhood listing. These state the importance of group and street scene and distinctive architectural features. The Museum of Cambridge's Capturing Cambridge History project records the history of Hills Road. Detailed architectural drawings exist for Raylands, as shown here, and for many of the area's pre-1914 houses and civic buildings. This section of Hills Road meets the City Council's criteria for a neighbourhood group listing. The proposed replacement is for a large block of flats that is not in harmony with its neighbours on Hills Road. It requires the loss of many trees and the green foliage of a landmark corner plot on this major city approach. This development contradicts the local plan and policies 3.3 and 3.4.
I would like to start by considering the case for demolition. Raylands has been occupied continuously as a family home since it was built. Carter Jonas' current marketing describes it as offering spacious accommodation, boasting a wealth of period features with fireplaces, wall paneling, sash windows, and an impressive staircase to the first floor. John Harris, who sits on the Design and Conservation panel, says, while presently enjoying no statutory status, it is worth preserving and giving another 100 years life as a much-loved family home. The Council's own urban design team states Raylands is a substantial building of character and asks whether options were explored to retain, convert, and extend the existing building. I will now turn to the amenities of neighbouring properties, an issue addressed in Policy 310, subdivision of existing plots. 310 is not mentioned in the planning officer's report, yet 310 is directed towards developments on existing plots with pre-existing neighbours, which is the case here. 310 states, residential development within the garden area or curtilage of existing properties will not be permitted under certain circumstances. None of these circumstances include whether the original dwelling remains. If a site is developed to provide 14 dwellings where there is one, by definition, the plot is subdivided, irrespective of whether the original dwelling remains. The next question is, who are the neighbouring properties? You can see here the council tax bill of a dwelling rare of 289 Hills Road. This dwelling is referred to as a two-story annex in the council's report, and when considering its amenities, it is stated that the status annex is unconfirmed in planning terms. I would like to stress that this is not an annex, but a dwelling whose amenities require consideration, just like any other neighboring dwelling. Critically, this dwelling sits on the boundary with Rayland. Here it is. And it is in fact a semi-detached building. According to 310, development will not be permitted if it will have an adverse impact through loss of privacy, loss of light, and overbearing sense of enclosure. Currently, there is one dwelling which sits roughly where the eastern block of the proposed development would sit. A new block would be added. There would be windows, a glazed atrium, and facing both properties at 289. There will be loss of privacy for both properties and for their gardens. There will be loss of light, since an entire block will be built where there is currently nothing facing south. It is difficult to assess the extent of these losses, as the landscape master plan has not been updated since August 2017, even though the proposal has changed twice since. And the submitted plans are marked as indicative in numerous instances, for example, with respect to tree planting. There will be an overbearing sense of enclosure, as the proposed development will be 3 stories high and contain 14 flats. It is difficult to perceive this when looking at these plans, because they are drawn so as to minimize the scale of the development relative to its neighbors, and the plans are misleading.
Good morning, I'm James Berry. I live on Hills Road. I tend to talk quietly, so if I'm not speaking loud enough, just tell me, please. I want to carry on discussing the amenities of neighbouring properties and look in more detail at light emission from the glazed link. The owner at 289 does have concerns about light emission. The senior planning officer points out there will be no direct light beams, and in any case, this will be filtered by the mature trees. But you can see from this diagram, the retained trees are marked in green. On the boundary, there are 3 mature trees, but those trees are deciduous, so for most of the year, they will not filter light. Much of the current vegetation on the boundary between 289 and 291 will be removed. So you can see from here that the trees will not conceal the glazed link. And that glazed link will be fully visible from both properties at 289. Let's look in more detail at this glazed link. It will be 3 stories high, a very large surface area. The glazed link obviously won't have blinds and curtains. Lights will switch on and off every time someone leaves or enters the building, and that will affect bats, birds, and wildlife. There are no benefits for any future residents of 291 because they can't look out at the obscure grazing, but there's a significant impact on the amenity of the neighbours who will be exposed to light emission. I want to come on to trees, Plan Policy 4.4. I want to talk about the basement construction plan. This is taken from NP Architects' basement construction site diagram, which is available on the planning portal. So there are 3 steps in constructing the basement. The first step is to build a fence which is positioned at the edge of the roof protection zone. And the second stage is to install sheet piles in some distance from the fence to avoid any damage to roots. There's no scale on the plan, but I estimate the distance is 4 metres. Steps 2 and 3 are to excavate the soil and complete the basement construction. So here is the basement construction plan in detail. The blue line shows the root protection zone. The green line shows the fence to protect the trees. And the pink line shows the basement piling. The fence, which is marked in green, should be on or outside the root protection zone. But you can see both to the north and to the south, it's well within the root protection zone. The sheet piling should be, I estimate, 4 metres away from the root protection zone, but instead it's touching it in several places. So we believe this basement excavation will damage those protected trees and roots. We have concerns about subsidies. There will be extensive pile driving required to install these sheet piles, which is a noisy and invasive mode of construction. Creating the basement will lower the water table and may result in cracking of the ground. Both 289 and 291 have been affected by subsidies in the past, and both are entirely underpinned. So this may cause significant damage to neighbouring properties. I want to come on to traffic, which was discussed at the last planning meeting. So this development is right on the corner of a very busy roundabout. Mills Road has the highest traffic levels in South East Cambridge, and the County Council's figures show that 2019 traffic levels are expected to be 19% higher than 2014. And the County Council labelled this junction as oversaturated, which means it can't handle current traffic levels thrown at it. You can see here long queues going all the way back to Admirals and beyond, and back to Mowbray Road. So the picture on the right shows the traffic queues that form outside the proposed entrance and exit of this development. The site entrance is very close to the junction. It's only 5 car lengths away. County Council figures show the maximum queue in the morning peak will be 33 cars. So cars will be unable to exit and safely join the queue. What will happen in practice is cars will simply pull out, which will lead to traffic congestion, and blocking motions of vehicles. There's also the risk of accidents because there's no pedestrian crossing on this arm of Queen's Way. Removal delivery vans, the plan is that they will enter the site. They have to do that because there's nowhere to park. There are double yellow lines everywhere here. This is a typical delivery van, which is 6 metres long. The driveway, shown here, is only 5 metres wide. That's not enough room for a 6-metre van to make a turning circle. The visitor parking space, which is shown here, if occupied, will block access to the garage. So a van delivering will not allow vehicles to enter or exit the garage. And there will be no room for that delivery van to make a 3-point turn. So in practice, what will happen is vans will reverse out onto Queen's Way, and that will compromise highway safety. What's called noise pollution, which is Plan Policy 413. Almost half of the site is covered with building footprint and hard surfaces. The only personal amenity space for residents would be their balconies. The developer commissioned a noise assessment which concluded that noise levels on balconies are expected to exceed recommended levels. In fact, the detailed figures are 69 decibels for Hills Road balconies, well above the recommended limit of 50 to 55. This assessment is based on 2014 traffic levels, which, as we've seen, have increased by 19% since then. The plan is to use mechanical ventilation rather than openable windows. This is the sealed box approach to a parking area. There was a recent article in the Cambridge News which pointed out that residents of Great Northern Road flats near the station are blinded by traffic levels and pollution. Their noise levels are 66, which is lower than the figure for this development. We're running short of time, so I'm just going to skip this. It's a summary of material planning considerations. So we do have an alternative proposal, which we think should at least be examined. Here we have 2 fine semi-detached houses on Hills Road. The original proposal was to demolish these 2 houses and build flats. That was refused by the planning committee, and instead these houses were converted into 10 flats. Here we have a detached building on 189 Hills Road. The original proposal was to demolish that building and build a new block of flats. The planning committee refused that, and instead the house was turned into student accommodation for St Andrews College. And our final example is Emmanuel College's student hostel, very close to this proposed development. What Emmanuel College did is to take 2 detached houses and build a synthetic extension, which is shown on the left-hand side. This accommodates 29 students. We like this approach. It's a creative solution that preserves the street scene and provides much-needed student accommodation. So our proposal is that the issues at least be considered. Let's retain existing property in the trees, convert the loft space, it does have a very high roof, and subdivide into flats. This will maintain the street scene whilst providing more housing units. Thank you very much. We appreciate the chance to explain our position.
Thank you for that. Can I now ask Police Officer Charlotte Burton to give us an update on the current position?
Thank you. The application was received on the 18th of May 2018 and was due for determination on the 7th of August. As has previously been said, the earliest date for the planning committee will be the 29th of August. I have received over 40 objections from third parties, including representations from the Hills Road and Queen Edith Way residents associations, as well as ward councillors. Officers have not yet come to a recommendation on the application. However, I thought it would be useful to provide a planning perspective on some of the issues that have been raised by the petitioners. The committee's decision on the previous application is a material consideration that I must give weight to, both when assessing whether those issues, the reasons for refusal, have been overcome through the revised submission, but also whether the current application raises any new issues that have been a concern. And as has previously been stated, the previous application was refused on the grounds of lack of affordable housing, inadequate cycle parking, cramped living conditions, and inadequate visitor parking. So other matters, including the principle of development, the design, the impact on the character of the area, the transport issues, were not raised as reasons for refusal on the previous application. The petitioners have made the case for against demolition of the building, and I must stress that the existing building is not protected from demolition in any way. It is not a listed building and it's not within the conservation area, so the applicants under the prior approval process for demolition would be able to demolish the property. So the demolition cannot be resisted in principle, and again, that wasn't an issue that was raised as a reason for refusal on the previous application. With regard to the impact on the environmental character, and in particular the trees, the current proposal is similar to the previous scheme in terms of retaining the 11 trees that have been protected on the site, and the tree officer supported the previous application and has raised no further concerns on the current application. With regard to the basement construction, those are details that the tree officer was satisfied with during the course of the planning application and could be secured through conditions. With regard to the impact on the character of the area, that has been raised by the petitioners. The design is substantially similar to the previous application in terms of the external appearance in the building envelope as well as the landscaping scheme. This was supported by Urban Design and the landscape officer. From my perspective, it would be difficult to come to a decision which was different to the previous application on this matter. In terms of the cramped living accommodation which has been raised by petitioners, it is important to, as part of the assessment, we're looking at how that compares to the national technical housing standards, and the applicant has provided the floor spaces there, which the units either meet or are extremely close to the technical housing standards. With regard to the impact on neighbours, again, the built envelope is substantially the same as the previous application, and the impact on neighbouring properties was not raised as a reason for refusal on the previous scheme. But obviously, as part of my assessment of this application, I will be making sure that there is consistency with the previous application, and if issues are raised, then assessing that as part of my recommendation. In terms of neighbours had raised in their petition concerns about inadequate amenity space, and balconies have been provided for the larger 2-bed units, and the council's consistent approach is usually not to require any external amenity space for 1-bed units, but this scheme does provide some space for 1-bed units. In terms of the transport issues, which has been raised as a concern, this was an issue that was addressed very strongly in the previous application. The current application has 1 fewer units, and I think from my perspective it would be difficult to come to a different recommendation to the previous application, given that the Highways Authority has assessed that impact very carefully and has advised us that there's no highway safety concerns. And with regard to the affordable housing requirements, the reduction in the number of units to 14 would comply with paragraph 30 of the Affordable Housing SPD, which has been explained to you, and also policy 5.5 in that regard. So that's a planning perspective on some of the issues that have been raised, which I hope is of use to councillors.
Thank you. Before I open this up for planning committee member questions, we have 2 ward councillors here. You're entitled to make a statement. You have no time limit, but can I ask please that you keep it as brief as possible? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a couple of issues that I wanted to address with regard to the new application. First of all, the applicant started off by stating that we should take emotion and nostalgia out of these decisions. Speaking as a representative of the residents of the area in question, I think that they would have a significantly different view of that. The agent has stated that this development control forum is not valid. Again, I think that members of the public have had an excellent opportunity to come and see the application before them today, so I would reject that statement entirely. And also, I question both the agent and the planning officer's assertion that there will be no significant impact on the public highway. Having taken over the role of ward councillor from Councillor Moore, who spoke very strongly and at length on this issue of the last application, I think that it's very difficult to come to the conclusion at a junction which is already over saturation, that by adding that's an additional 13 residents, and however many residents that turns out to be, because you've got 2 and 3 bedroom units there as well, that would have no impact on that junction. Well, if the junction's already over saturation, then surely we're going to add an impact to it. It's very clear that where the entrance and exit to the site is requires that the vast majority of people coming out of that driveway are going to turn right against the traffic flow coming away from the junction in an attempt to join a queue which is already queuing from the junction past where that entrance is. So I think that's going to create a very significant impact on that junction and the traffic flow there, which is already quite difficult. I wanted to talk about the issue of meeting the housing needs of Cambridge. It's been quite well discussed already that the application doesn't provide any affordable housing, and the previous application at 15 units was refused because the SPD would have required a level of affordable housing. We now see that we've adjusted the application to duck just under that limit at 14 units, again to avoid the requirement to provide any affordable housing. I think it's quite clear that Cambridge suffers from a lack of affordable housing. I'd really like to have spoken with and worked with the developers to see if there was any opportunity here to address that issue instead of going out of their way to try to avoid that and maximise the number of unaffordable units on the site. we've spoken about cramped accommodation, and that was a very significant reason for a refusal of the previous application. And then just finally, I wanted to come and talk about the trees on the site. I've had an opportunity to ask Joanna Davis, the tree officer, a number of questions that were raised for me around the trees, and I wanted to pass on a number of these as questions to the agent and the applicant, and see if they would be willing to respond. So, as I understand it, a tree protection method statement would likely be required for both the demolition application and separately for the development, ahead of commencement of those works. Would the applicant be willing to provide this statement as part of the planning application process to provide some level of certainty around tree protection methods? And similar to the protection of the existing trees, I wanted to ask a similar question with regard to new planting. There's an indicative planting demonstrated in drawing P101, which is available on the planning portal. And I am really encouraged to see that there's a lot of indicative new planting shown on that drawing, and I thank you for that. Particularly with regard to the border of Hills Road, you can see a number of new trees proposed to be planted in that location. And indeed close to the border with 289. However, those are indicative drawings, and they do remain a concern for me that those would actually be delivered in that form. With the greatest respect to the applicant, they have a number of other developments in the area, and as far as I can see, there's no significant new planting or indeed protection of existing trees in those developments. So again, the question would we be willing to change those from an indicative planting plan to a clear undertaking at planning time, which I think would alleviate some of the concerns of residents. And a final question for the applicant would be, during the construction phase and any enabling tree works, where will contractors' vehicles be parked? We've seen from drawings large amounts of fencing and excavation will be happening on the site. We've discussed it's an extremely busy junction, so is there any compromise that would allow for deliveries, loading, unloading, etc., and parking of contractors' vehicles that would not end up with a permanent line of vehicles for months on end along Queen Edith's Way? Could we, for instance, protect the grass verges on Queen Edith's Way with house fencing during the construction period? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Gibson Developments for giving us their side of the story. We appreciate you're a small local company and you have lived in Romsey all your life, and it's also you lived in Hills Roads. And I've also lived for 42 years in Queen Edith, and I know the area very, very well. 20 years ago, when the place came up for sale for £300,000, it was very obvious, it was very clear, it was like this picture, and clearly the last owner did not look after the bushes, and they've grown, and slowly people cannot see it, but it has been a landmark in Cambridge, and it would be a great loss to the city to lose such a property. You also said you care for newly built houses rather than you need to knock things down and build from scratch, because perhaps it's more expensive to cut a house out and subdivide it. And obviously, I've known people who tried to cut the house out and they couldn't claim the VAT back, and it was far more expensive. But when we as business people make a business mistake, we mustn't keep on pushing to try and make the whole of the city pay for our business mistake. You bought the place, to me it was a business mistake that you had made. it should have gone to a family. And the reason I'm saying that it's a business mistake is because policy 3.4 states developments will be permitted which demonstrate that they have responded to their context and drawn inspiration from the key characteristics of their surroundings and create distinctive places. Such developments will identify and respond positively to existing features, will be well connected and integrated with the immediate locality, and they can use the characteristics of the locality to help inform the seating, massing, design, the materials for the proposed development. And to me, looking at that picture and what you're proposing to do, there's no comparison. It's between daytime and nighttime. This is a beautiful building, and what you're proposing is not. And if I go back to history, Hills Road was built by the Romans. It was a only straight road through Cambridge. Started from there, it went through the city centre, all the way to Hamilton Road, and we built houses around. A beautiful, and it's a very welcoming entrance into the city of Cambridge. Hills Road as well as Hamilton Road. And if we knock one beautiful house down, the next thing that will happen, we will knock the one next to it, and the one next to it, and the one next to it. And it will end up being a city like Stevenage or something else. Cambridge makes 20% of its income from tourism. And the people come to see Cambridge, they come here to see not George Kippers, not Peter Thompson. They come to see our culture, they come to see our architecture, they come to sample our ambience. And if we turn our city into something which is very modern and neutral, nobody would come here. And we will lose. He would say, no, but 20% of our income, £7.5 million comes into the city every year. Okay? So, my suggestion is, if we can really work with this building, if we can gut it out and leave the outside looking as it is, it would be wonderful. And that will retain the character of the street, that will retain the character of Cambridge. Because once this is done, you sort of have a precedent, and I can assure you, in the next 20 years, all the houses in Hills Road will be concrete and looking horrible, like the one you have suggested to build. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'll open this up for members of the Planning Committee to ask questions, and I believe Councillor Pipkin, you have your hand up. Thank you.
Chair, I've got a question for you and about the purpose of this development control. When you announced that this matter is coming before us on the 29th of August, that's 3 weeks away, can I recall the purposes of the Development Control Forum, as you set them out at the beginning, which was to seek consensus, to see if there was a compromise? My question to you is, have you any evidence at all that there is any room for manoeuvre at all, that the applicants have indicated in any form that they're willing to withdraw this application and reconsider it in the light of the well-known objections? Or are we simply going through the motions of rehearsing the arguments, which should be more properly restricted to the Planning Committee meeting for the determination of this application? So that's my first question to you. My second question is to the case officer, and I'm afraid it's a difficult question. She has explained that we refused this application a few months ago on 4 grounds. Those 4 grounds have all, if you like, in at least the applicant's terms, been addressed. But the whole discussion this morning has been over a whole range of issues beyond the 4 in question. And my question to her is it thinkable that when we come to determine this application on August the 29th, we can begin to induce a a number of additional reasons that we didn't posit on the previous application, that would be valid, that would be, how would that stand in front of an inspector? May I just remind people here of the disaster of Wilton Terrace, where this planning committee gave ground to a strength of local being, but infringed our own planning guidelines to such an extent that the inspector effectively punished this authority by a huge financial fine. So I do ask you, sir, the question about process, and I would ask the case officer if she thinks we would be in order in adducing reasons other than the 4 original reasons for refusal.
Thank you. At the beginning, I set out what the purpose of this forum is. It is to explore scope for consensus. It is to allow the petitioners to be able to raise their concerns, and it is for officers to be able to take away those concerns and consider those and report those to members. It is also for members to be able to ask questions today to seek clarification. So I can't say any more than that, really. That's what the purpose of the forum is. A decision was made that we would hold this forum, and there were good reasons for that. And I think it's important that we do allow the petitioners an opportunity to raise these issues. In relation to your question to the police officer, are you happy to answer that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. As members of the committee will be aware, previous decisions that have been made on past applications are material considerations for assessing any future applications on the same site. And clearly the current application is for a very similar scheme to the one that was previously determined. Therefore, I must give, as part of my assessment in my recommendation to you, I must give strong weight to the decision that the members of the committee made on the previous application and the reasons for refusal. So my assessment will be looking at the differences between the previous scheme and the current application, whether those firstly overcome those reasons for refusal, but secondly, in doing that, does it raise any new material issues that the committee could take into consideration? I think where the scheme is similar, it would be very difficult to raise new concerns on new issues. However, where there are differences between the two schemes, then it could be that new reasons for refusal could be formed. But I think it would be very difficult to introduce new reasons for refusal, such as the transport impact, the impact on trees, where it is similar or less of an impact than the previous application, to introduce those as new reasons for refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Swanborough.
Can you just be absolutely clear? Is this a resubmission of a previous scheme, or is this a new submission?
It is a new planning application. The previous application was determined, so this is a new planning application. However, the scheme is substantially different, substantially similar. So the scheme has been revised, but a new application has been submitted for a new determination.
No, I realise that, but under planning law, if it's a resubmission, then there wouldn't be any. Was there a fee submitted with this? Does it go down to that? Is this substantially the same, slightly revised submission, or is it a completely new submission under planning?
Can I answer that? It's a new planning application, but can I also say that the purpose of today is to discuss the issues that have been raised by the petitioners rather than perhaps matters that might be more relevant to the planning committee. But it is a new application, completely new application.
So the question is,
any other questions? Councillor
Well, I'll ask one particular question about the revised application, Chair, but just a general question, I think, to both applicants and petitioners. And I'll try and couch it in a polite, non-patronising way, but it's a case of, do you appreciate, as a planning member, as members of the planning committee, our starting point for this revised application is the end of the discussion on the previous application and our decision on that previous application?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, if I can just clarify the point I made before, this is a completely
As a question, sorry, as a question to either both petitioners and applicants, do you appreciate, as a planning committee, our starting point for looking at this new revised application is the end of the previous application discussion and the reasons for refusal we gave on the back of it?
Can I say on behalf of the applicant that we absolutely understand that, and that is why our new application, which is effectively a resubmission addressing the 4 identified reasons for refusal. So we absolutely understand that. If you look closely at the petitioner's position, it is very clear they don't understand that because they continue to raise all of the issues that they have raised previously at both the DCF and at the planning meeting. And I would also say, especially seeing a hand up, that was the case also with the ward councillors when they raised substantially the same issues in a letter that they wrote to the planning committee, to the case officer.
Okay.
We do appreciate the point that you make. Do you appreciate that we are novices in this? We are learning planning law as we go along. So, in fact, yes, we are raising points that we didn't raise before because we didn't know enough. We're learning how to read plans, we're learning planning. We're doing our best here.
Thank you. And if I can just clarify that, yes, this is a new planning application, it's a new submission, but as Charlotte Burton said, the previous refusal is a material consideration. We have to take that into account. Councillor Smart.
Thank you to the petitioners and to the applicants for coming to present. It's been very interesting to listen to the arguments. There are a few questions. So I thought I heard the agent say that the scheme met the nationally prescribed housing standards. But then I thought I heard the officer say that it meets in most cases, but some are quite close. When the officer said close, I presume that meant that it doesn't meet, lower than. So it'd be good to know that. The petitioner said the plans were misleading. It wasn't quite clear why they were misleading. No evidence was given. So if anyone can let me know why they're misleading, that would be good. On the deliveries, I presume delivery vehicles could reverse in. That seems to be the obvious thing to me, looking at what was being presented. And finally, the comparison with the flats on Station Road leading up to the station, I presume, isn't so pertinent as they have opening doors, whereas this scheme doesn't have opening windows or doors, as was described today. If that could be confirmed, that would be good too. Thank you.
Charlotte, can I ask you to respond to the windows and doors and the space matters, please? Sorry, Councillor Smart, could you just repeat your question about the openings and windows and doors, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was talking about the 69 decibels as opposed to 66 decibels along Station Road, and this scheme, as described, I believe, doesn't have opening windows or doors that are mechanically ventilated, whereas the scheme built on Station Road with the problems of noise does have opening doors and windows onto balconies and onto the road.
Sorry, while we look at that, could I ask the petitions perhaps to answer the question about the misleading plans? Thank you.
I made the statement in my presentation that the plans were misleading. I said that because in several instances, scales used in different parts of the drawings are different, so that the development is made to appear small in relation to the neighboring properties, which are made to appear very big, so that you don't get the impression that it will actually occupy more than 50% of the grounds, which is the case. In other cases, the scales are simply not given, so that it is not possible to establish exactly where things sit in relation to them. And generally, they mention that some aspects are indicative. raises the question of how can the determination of amenity loss be made when replacement plans for trees are indicative? Whether there is screening by trees or not will determine whether there is loss of privacy or not. But if the plans are only indicative, I do not understand how there can be a determination or how we can understand what's going on. So it is in these three respects that I have used, that found that I should use the word misleading to qualify the plans.
Can I just ask Charlotte Benham to answer the other questions first?
Thank you. Just responding to Councillor Smart's first comment regarding the internal space. The units meet the technical housing standards with the exception of 3 of the units, which I think were highlighted by the agent in their presentation, being 2, 4 and 10, which are 60 square metres as opposed to 61 square metres set out in the technical housing standards. So there's a shortfall of 1 square metre. But as the agent pointed out, that there is provision for those units to have external amenity space, which is in addition to that internal space. And obviously the technical housing standards are not adopted by the council. The council has no adopted space standards, so we need to look at all factors when considering the quality of the accommodation that's being provided. In response to the question regarding windows, openable windows. The environmental health team advised me on the previous application that the impact of traffic noise can be mitigated through a mechanical ventilation system which would allow the future occupiers to be able to control internal thermal comfort and cooling without compromising acceptable internal noise levels. And details of that would be secured through a condition. So that was considered to be acceptable by the environmental health team on the previous application.
Councillor Smart, does that answer your questions?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, you have one more?
I don't know another one though, but I just wanted to come back if I could. That's all right. So my point on the technical housing standards is that I appreciate that they're not our policy, although they have material weight in planning. But that, as I said before, but it's useful to say in the public arena here, is that they are meant to be minimum standards, not targets. So we shouldn't be aiming to get developers to aim to try and get as close as possible to those standards. There should be minimum numbers, minimum areas of space that developers should be aiming to get above.
Yes, I think that's probably a point you might make.
Yeah. I think it's useful to make that point.
Thank you. Councillor Thornborough.
The developers kind of went through very clearly and have stated that they've addressed reasons for refusal on the previous application, but another change from the previous application to this application is providing 15 flats to 14 flats, and they haven't explained why they have gone from 15 flats to 14 flats, so perhaps they could tell us about that.
Do you like to answer that, please?
Yeah, that's fine. Councillor Thornborough, the policy in the local plan requires that affordable housing is provided in schemes which deliver in excess of 14 units, so 15 or more units. Within the SPD, it states, the guidance document from 2010, that on schemes which involve the demolition of a single dwelling house, that affordable housing should be calculated on a gross basis and not a net basis. So the view which was taken previously by the committee with the scheme for 15 units was that would have resulted in a gross increase of 15 units, and it therefore didn't comply with the affordable housing policies in the adopted local plan. So that is why the scheme now seeks consent for 14, and in line with the policy in the plan, schemes which deliver 14 units, there is no requirement to provide affordable housing.
Thank you. Councillor Becker, did you have a question?
Well, I'm tempted to be cheeky and ask why they didn't go for 15 or 16 and actually then provide affordable housing, but I think that's probably necessary. Just a specific question. In terms of this new revised application compared to the previous, could you just refresh my memory in terms of the numbers of visitor car parking spaces that as part of that change?
Certainly, Councillor Gillespie. On the slide which I have presented, so at ground floor, it is proposed the space provided there is for visitors, and then within the basement there's one disabled space which is allocated to flat 1, which is to be fitted out and provided for and accessible for wheelchair users and compliant with the disability requirements. It is also proposed that there is another space which could either accommodate a visitor or another disabled user, and then there's also a separate visitor space within the basement as well. So in total, there are 4 spaces now which are allocated for disabled users or visitors.
How's that compared to the previous application?
Previously, there was just the one disabled stroke visitor space provided at ground floor. We've now provided an additional 3 spaces.
Any other questions, Councillor Thornbury?
Sorry, Jim, you've explained about your connections with Cambridge over for many years and your understanding about Hills Road and the feeling about the residents being into the applications. And I just asked you, why did you not stay with 15 flats and provide affordable housing? Because it is required in Cambridge, and we have a housing crisis for lower cost housing, and every opportunity should be made to provide those houses. And if you, we also need housing, higher spec housing for people as well. But affordable housing is in dire shortage, and this would have been an opportunity for you to provide that on this site. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Can I just say that Gibson Developments have been involved with affordable housing in the past. I think affordable housing is a good and necessary thing. I also say that from a personal point of view, I'm involved with a number of charities and social enterprises. And one organisation whose raison d'etre is to provide affordable rented accommodation. And I was having a long conversation yesterday with somebody associated with that enterprise. The trees was the real stumbling block on the site. There are a very large number of trees, and obviously with the root zones of those trees, it severely constrains and restricts what you can do on site. And as I said in my earlier remarks, from the very start, we realised that in terms of what we could best get on the site, we should perhaps, in our own financial interests, have just removed all those trees that were not protected. But we knew that would be highly productive, and we felt it was the wrong. I felt it was the wrong thing to do, not least because of being a local resident. And so we engaged very early in the pre-planning process, long before we had exchanged any contracts or even agreed a price with the previous owner. And as we anticipated, very early in the process, the tree officer came to site, and immediately 7 further trees were made the subject of protection orders. And so it's very limited what you can get on the site. And so I have to say, in this particular case, it was a financial decision that primarily drove it. We could not see a way of actually putting affordable housing on the site in a viable way. Now, our advice from the outset was that Cambridge City Council operate a gross to net policy. Having engaged from February 2017, I think it's accurate to say that not until it was raised by the campaigners with the days before the planning committee met, so that's 14 months after we began this process, for the very first time, the question of the gross to net was challenged. Nobody said to us at the pre-planning stage that it was a problem. Nobody said to us when the application went in that it was a problem. The case officer didn't think it was an issue, and planning policy didn't think it was an issue. So it came as a complete surprise to us when the sort of gross to net was challenged And it seemed to be, dare I say, a technicality. There was a wording about large houses. I mean, we've since established that there was a scheme on Madingley Road where there were 16 new dwellings and 2 large houses. So, so it's 16 less 2 is 14, and that was passed. So, we don't agree with the reasons that were given, but in this new application, essentially a resubmission, we have addressed that to the best extent that we can, given that it's already looking shaky, the finances on this development, which again is why I said earlier that when considering our options following the April meeting, we have been marketing this unit to establish if there is anybody out there who actually is willing to buy it as a family home or buy it in order to convert into flats or for some other purpose. It isn't what we do. And if I can just briefly mention something that Councillor Pitter said earlier on, there are lots of plumbers who aren't electricians. There are lots of builders who aren't estate agents. We, as a developer, we don't do new build housing, pure and simple. We don't have that particular skill set. So we don't consider that we made a wrong business decision in the first instance. So I don't know that answers your question, but anyway, that's my answer.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes.
I'm sure a good builder, developer who provides good flat accommodation could further your business to provide good family houses as well. I'm sure, looking forward in the future, I'm sure you'd be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the planning committee members? No? Okay, thank you. I hand over to the applicants. You have 5 minutes if you would just like to say.
Thank you, Nigel. The proposed development seeks permission for the demolition of a single dwelling and the erection of 14 flats to be provided within 2 blocks, along with access, car parking and associated landscaping. This application represents a resubmission of planning application 17-1372-FUL that was refused planning permission by this committee in May of this year, despite a positive recommendation from officers. The principle of development is acceptable and the existing dwelling on the site is not protected. It is felt that the application has responded positively to the 4 refusal reasons considered to exist at the site by members of the Planning Committee. A high quality and sustainable form of development will be introduced to the site, and it is considered that there is a demand for this form of accommodation within Cambridge. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you. Petitions, do you wish to start? Thank you. Yes. Again, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Whether a new application can be rejected on grounds that are different from those used to reject a previous application on the same site is a legal issue where a lot will hinge on whether this is a new application. The fact that we're having a DCF indicates this is a new application. But also, it's common sense that if valid reasons were not brought to light initially, but which do indeed contradict planning policy, a refusal would be upheld by the planning inspectorate, since the planning inspectorate will focus on all aspects and will adjudicate on whether the application contradicts planning policy. We reiterate our main point. We object in the strongest possible terms to this application. The proposal is misconceived, and without radical changes, it is impossible to address its fundamental flaws in the context of the existing and the emerging local plans of the NPPF and all other material consideration. Precise and up-to-date information would have demonstrated this irrevocably. In the spirit of the DCF, we have engaged with the application, but this was difficult because documents submitted are out of date, incomplete or inaccurate. Specifically, the landscape master plan dates from August 2017. The noise assessment is based on 2014 traffic. There's no precise tree replacement plan. Plans are in several instances described as indicative. The basement construction plans are self-contradictory. There are few usable scales, and the relative size of buildings is misrepresented. The standard of the application is surprising. The proposed development would cause significant and demonstrable harm to reasonable residential amenity of neighbours. It would cause unacceptable permanent damage to the amenity of neighbours by the domineering impact, unacceptable sense of enclosure, overlooking, and the perception of overlooking, arising from the built form and its fenestration. The general loss of privacy, not just overlooking, caused to long-standing existing residents, which is especially unreasonable in the context of the existing character and appearance of the locality, and the threat to the long-term future of the trees. The nature of existing development in the locality is typical of this part of Hills Road. The introduction of a high-density, flatted urban development of unsympathetic contemporary design would be totally out of character and would cause unacceptable and permanent harm to the character and appearance of the area. We object to the principle of the development. Raylands should remain a family home or be converted to provide homes for many families while remaining a beautiful feature of the splendid group of buildings announcing the Hills Road southern entry to Cambridge.
Thank you.
Just continuing. This opportunistic application has dropped the number of units provided from 50 to 14, so as not to have to deliver any affordable housing. It's ignored all the local concerns about amenity, pollution, transport, and the desire to preserve Hills Road's distinct architectural character, its leafiness, and its urban wildlife. As the architectural historian John Harris, who's on the Cambridge Design and Conservation panel, states, 291 doesn't aim an architectural statement, but it's fresh, comfortable, and all of a piece, and it forms a distinct and satisfactory full stop at the top of its ridge, the succession of Edwardian houses from 275 on that ends this length of Hills Road. The new MPPF from next January puts more focus on local character and neighbourhood. Paragraph 127 states that planning policies and decisions should ensure that developments C are sympathetic to local character and history, including the surrounding built environment and landscape setting. D, establish or maintain a strong sense of place, using the arrangement of streets, spaces, building types, and materials to create attractive, welcoming, and distinctive places to live, work, and visit. And F, creates places that are safe, inclusive, and accessible, and which promote health and well-being with a high standard of amenity for existing and future users. We know that you understand that this is more than about just saving Raylands, which is why there's been so much citywide resistance to this application. There are over 200 objections in total for the application. This is about saving Cambridge for the next generation as a beautiful heritage city and a good place to live. And this is why we will be asking the Council to consider setting up a new conservation zone and a neighbourhood listing for this side of the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think clearly today we've heard some strong views, and I think we're clear about what those views are. I think there have been some issues raised. We will take those away. We will look carefully at what's been said, and if there is anything in there that we feel that we can approach the applicants with for further negotiation, we will do that, and we will report all of the issues that have been raised today to the Planning Committee. So I hope